to kind of kick things off, I just wanted to introduce myself. If you do not know me already, my name is Max Stevenson. I'm the Director of Exhibitions and Programs at Norway House here in Minneapolis. And it's my pleasure tonight to host both Anne and Dr. Michael Rogness here, so Anne Nordby and Dr. Michael Rogness, in this writing class tonight. We actually had a class last week on kind of discovering and researching genealogy and heritage, and how perfect tonight that we get to have the Write Your Own Memoirs class. I can actually see here on the side, a few of the participants tonight participated in our last class. So hopefully that this class tonight will help kind of give you some inspiration to write your own memoirs and your own stories. But with that, I do want to introduce both Anne and Michael. So Anne Nordby is a writing coach with 30 years of experience as a writer, editor, and instructional designer, most recently at the University of Minnesota. She runs some summer essay workshops for high school students who are applying to selective colleges and teaches adult professionals to write clearly for business. And then joining Anne tonight is Dr. Michael Rogness, who is Professor Emeritus of Luther Seminary and author of several books. So before I turn it over to them, I actually have a poll that Anne and Michael have asked me to share with you folks tonight, just to kind of prep us all in thinking about how we can, well, how they can help you best approach writing your memoirs. So I'm going to share a poll with all of you now, and you will see here that some options should pop up. Oh, poll is now in progress, and you can answer this, and we'll give you some time here to answer these questions, this poll. And in the meantime, I will let Anne and Michael introduce themselves a little bit further. So with that, Anne and Michael, I'll turn it over to you folks.
Hi, I'll just introduce myself and say hello briefly. I'm Anne Nordby, and as Max said, I am a lifelong writer and editor, and I have my own business. I'm a writing coach, and I teach people to write clearly and engagingly. And most of my clients are high school students who are learning to write well for high school and who are writing their very demanding and high stakes application essays for their college applications. So summer is the time when they start doing that before their senior year in high school. And Michael is going to introduce himself and inspire us. No pressure. And by the way, we did not plan to wear the same shirt today. That's purely coincidence.
Right. It's nice to be with all of you. I'm very interested in this whole topic because I come from a long family of writers. My great-great-grandmother wrote her own memoirs. I'll talk about that later. And since then, a whole lot of people in our family have written their stories and whatnot. But so I've been doing this for quite some time. And of course, I'm hugely grateful that we're now computerized, because my great-great-grandmother had to write all this out in hand, but now we can just whack it off on our computers. At any rate, let me begin by, should I just start in?
Yeah.
We're all done with introductions,
Please
right?
do.
Okay.
Well,
let me give my,
sorry, pause real quick. Did you want me to share the poll before we got started?
okay.
Yeah, let's see the results.
Yeah, so we'll kind of, before we move on, I'll share the results of the poll here. Looks like a majority of people have answered. So I think you're gonna see them all, the answers here. I will share the results. Don't worry, it doesn't say who said it. It just says the numbers. So it looks like a large majority, 45% haven't written anything yet, 45% have written something. So 5, and then one person has done a lot of memoir writing in the past. So I think this will help Anne and Michael as they present tonight. So with that, I'm gonna let them take over. I'm gonna disappear for a little while. So take it away, Anne and Michael.
Okay, thank you very much. I will begin by telling you a story, and that is about a Norwegian girl who was born about 200 years ago. Her name was Caroline Dorothea Margaret. The family called her Linka. And she, when she was 15 years of age in Norway, Kristiansand, she started writing her own little stories. She made a diary of herself. And she's 6 years later, after starting the diary, she married her childhood sweetheart, Herman, who became a pastor. And Herman and Linka decided to emigrate to the United States from Kristiansand. And the night before she emigrated, Linka wrote in her diary, she said, "The last few days have been much occupied with farewells and leave takings, with beloved friends and dear places, but none so hard and painful as the parting that evening. For the last time in many years, I have seen my little sisters and have given them a parting kiss." And then the next day, right before she left to set sail for America, she wrote this in her diary. "Now I'm going to bed. The ship lies quietly in the harbor. Will this be the last night I sleep in Norway? Who can tell whether my eyes again will ever look upon the mountains of Norway? Good night, my sisters, my brothers, and all my loved ones. May the Lord keep you all under his protecting wings. Goodbye. May life be good to you. I know you will remember your Linka." Most of you can remember from your own ancestors and from your own family stories like this, leaving Norway or whatever country they left from, knowing that they would probably never again see their loved ones again. In those days, it wasn't easy to get on an airplane and fly 6 hours to go back to Europe. So they never saw their loved ones again. Anyway, after writing that, she observed her 22nd birthday on the ocean at sea. And after 7 weeks on the ocean, they landed in New York, and she traveled to Wisconsin, where she and her husband settled near Milwaukee in a little Norwegian settlement called Muskego. And she wrote this. This is what she wrote in her diary. Linka wrote, "Sunday, Herman preached. We were in a church. This is the smallest church I've ever been in. Without steeple, without bell, without an altarpiece, with no chasubles. Otherwise," she said, "the entire service was in Norwegian." That was in the old Muskego church, and that was and Herman preached in that church the first sermon on July 27th, exactly 170 years ago. This July 7th, we ought to go over to that church and observe it somehow. Anyway, that church, the old Muskego church, was moved log by log to the campus here at Luther Seminary in St. Paul. So from time to time, the students still have church, still have chapels, particularly in summertime, have chapel service in the old Muskego church where my great-great-grandfather preached his first sermon in America 170 years ago. Well, in America, all the year, Linka kept writing her little notes. She grabbed whatever pieces of paper she could, and she took notes and wrote a diary on life in America, what it was like. And she didn't really do anything with them. She put them in boxes, different size boxes, whatever happened to be empty at the time. And when the congregation came to celebrate by this time they're in Spring Prairie, Wisconsin. And when the congregation came to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the congregation, they thought, well, we better check them, see if we can find some old papers to write the history of the congregation. They looked up in the attic of the parsonage at Spring Prairie, Wisconsin by Muskego, and here were boxes and boxes and boxes. By this time, the family had never really paid much attention to it. They'd been moved from house to house. And now they thought, well, they better look at it. And they discovered these were this was Linka's diary. And so they started putting them together. And in 1952, the whole thing was published as Linka's diary because this book became, I got to make sure, yeah, there you go. This book became really an important book for Norwegian American history because it tells about that particular settlement, what it was like. So this book here is, it's really a book of my family history because it turns out Linka is my great-great-grandmother. So this book is not only an important book in Norwegian American history, but it's also an important book for our family. I have 16, you all have 16 great-great-grandparents. Linka is my great-great-grandmother. And out of those 16 great-great-grandparents that I have, only one of them wrote a book, and that's Linka. She's the only, otherwise we really have no idea what it was like for all these people to emigrate from Norway, settle in America, and what it was like, except for a few scattered papers here and there. But with Linka, we have a whole record of what it was like for her to come to America, not speaking any English, living with different people, raising her family, bearing children. They had 4 children, and they raised a family. Fortunately, because she wrote this, we have her story. We have her story. Let me just read some of the excerpts that when she wrote. At age 18, or age 15, she began writing this. And one of the first things she wrote, she said, "The last few days have been much occupied with farewells and sad leaving taking with beloved friends and dear places, none so heavy in burden as a parting this evening. Last time in many years I have seen my little sisters and given them a parting kiss." And I've often thought, it's the same story with all these immigrants. They left Norway knowing they probably never see their family again. Now, of course, it's changed. We can get on an airplane. But for Linka, she knew that she would probably never see her family again. As a matter of fact, she did in her later life, but she didn't know that then. She observed her 22nd birthday on the ocean, and then they landed in New York. And then she came, and they came to Spring Prairie, Wisconsin. And over the years, she kept writing these, and she put the pieces of paper in little boxes and paid no attention to them. And it wasn't until after she died, some years, when they moved all of the stuff, they just moved all the boxes and put it in her son's attic. And then her son ended up in her grandson's attic. And when they celebrated the centennial, that's when they started putting the book together. And this is something, we can all do this. It's a lot easier to do this actually now because you're computerized. I've been doing this for years, writing stories about the family. I remember one year I got some of my uncles were together at a lake cabin, and they started telling stories of the family, stories I'd never heard about, I'd never heard before. And so I went home and I started making notes of some of these stories, and then I had to go back and check with my uncles to make sure I got it right. But that got me started on writing family stories. I have to show here's a piece of paper. This is the document that I wrote. It has now, it's 353 single-spaced pages of typewritten copy. It's 354 pages long. And on each story, I make a title for each story. And then the first 3 pages, I simply list the stories. This tells, you can sort of see, I just list the stories. Yeah, I just list the stories, and then the rest of it is the stories. So it'll probably never get published, and who knows who will ever read it, but at least it's down on paper. And it helps me to remember too. So that's why I just think it does you a lot of good, and it's for sure it's going to do a lot of good for people that come after you, your children, grandchildren. Your children will have lived a lot of this. They may not be interested in reading it, but I think it's more for the next generation because life changes so much. Every generation, I think back to the life of my grandparents and the life that they grew up in, it was altogether different. My dad's family came from the farm. My kids don't know anything about farm life now. But reading that gives them a glimpse of what it was like. So that's why I think it's a great idea to just write stuff. You don't have to get all caught up in what kind of format. Just start writing it. And even though, who knows if anybody will ever read it, but it'll help you. It'll help you remember things, and it will, for sure, somebody in the next generation is going to be very, very grateful. Because if it hadn't been for my great-great-grandmother Lincoln, we wouldn't know these family stories. We wouldn't know any of these stories. But she did it. I got to tell one more story.
Okay. One
more story. This is about my wife. My wife grew up in Hungary, and as a little girl, she went through the Second World War in Hungary as a little girl. At the end of the war, her parents decided they would leave Hungary because the Russians were rolling in. And so they left Hungary. And for 5 years, my wife, Eva, grew up in Germany, spent 5 years in Germany, and then came to America. And of course, in those turbulent years, nobody's writing anything. So one time, this was maybe 30 years ago, Eva and her brothers grew up here in the United States. but I knew very little about the past. And one time I had to drive my mother-in-law, Eva's mother, drive her to Northfield because she was accustomed to seeing a doctor down in Northfield. So I picked her up. They lived in Roseville. I picked her up. And as we drove off towards Northfield, I put a tape recorder in the middle of between us in the front seat. I turned it on and I asked my mother-in-law, now tell me what it was like to leave Hungary. And so she told what it was like to leave Hungary. And of course, hugely dramatic story at the end, all in the chaos of the Second World War. And then they came to Germany for 5 years, and she told about what it was like to live in Germany. And it was about that time we got to Northfield. Well, anyway, I took that little recorder and I typed it up. That is the only family hit story of my wife's family, because nobody had the opportunity of writing it before. Since then, we've added a lot of stuff. Eva remembers a lot of things, and we've added things. So we have a pretty good record. But if it hadn't been for that, that whole story would have never been known by the grandchildren. So I'm a great advocate. Write your own story. Write your own, even if you think it's really boring. That's what people tell me. Oh, you have a real interesting life. You went to Germany, blah, so and so and so. That's irrelevant. The story of your life is really interesting for people who will read it. So start writing it. And if you're computerized, so much the better. If you're not computerized, then get a good ballpoint pen, but just do it.
Oh, so true. I'm going to repoint the camera here at myself.
While he gets situated, Anne, I'm just going to pop in here as the voice.
Yes.
Thank you, Michael, so much for your story sharing there. Hopefully, you've inspired some people. I think you've inspired me even to start writing some of these things down, like you were saying, so we can share them with future generations. But just real quick before Anne begins, I just want to let everyone know, if you do have questions, we will be doing questions at the very end, and you can click on the Q&A button at the very bottom of your screen. If you're on a desktop device, you just hover over the video, it should pop up. If you're on a mobile device, you can just tap the screen and it should pop up there. And we'll take some time for questions at the very end. So with that, Anne.
Thank you. So Michael has inspired us to get started. But how do you get started? And how do you keep going? I just want to have some slides. So I'm going to share my screen with you. So I'm going to make a few points about writing, and can everyone see my screen okay? Michael or Max, is that working okay now?
Yep, all coming through here.
Okay.
If anyone's having problems, please just feel free to use the chat button to let me know. So.
Okay, great. So I wanted to mention a couple of things. Right. So what's the difference between a memoir and an autobiography? I had a feeling that people might be wondering about that. And the difference is very little. They're both collections of personal stories, but an autobiography, I would say, is a bigger job. An autobiography usually is a story of a person's entire life. A person usually only writes one autobiography, but memoirs are much more flexible. You may have seen memoirs. In fact, one of your presenters this fall is going to be Eric Dregnan. He wrote this book called In God We Trust, which many of you, I'm sure, know. He's a Minnesotan who wrote this memoir that was about his 1 year of living in Norway and what that was like for him and his wife. They had a baby while they were there. It's very humorous. It talks a lot about food, fish, because it's called In God We Trust. And so that would be a memoir. As you think about writing your memoir, we do it because we want to remember things and we want our family to remember things. But I want to ask you to consider before you start writing, I think it will save some time and help you to organize your thoughts. If you think about who it's for, who exactly it's for. For example, are you writing this for children? If you're writing your memoirs for children, you will probably tell different stories than you would for adults. You would use probably different words to describe things. You might not describe very painful memories, use off-color jokes. If you are writing for adults, you'll use different tone. You might also clearly identify things such as spousal abuse, miscarriage, and things like that. And third, I'd like you to consider whether your memoirs are intended for people outside of the family to read. Because if you're writing for people outside of the family, you're going to have to explain things more. You're going to have to give people's first and last names. Instead of saying Uncle Barnaby's farm near Nisswa, you might give Barnaby's full name and exact location or a little bit about him. You might also not want to give away family secrets if it's going to be for the general public. So just some things to think about before you get started. And the reason I mention that is because if you change your audience, you're going to have to revise a lot more. So when you start, and I'm sure that Michael has given us this feeling already, that when you start writing, you can just bite off small chunks. It does not have to be a huge, overwhelming thing. You can just write about one period of your life, one day in your life. You could start writing about what it's been like living under COVID for the past year. In fact, I would encourage you to write about that because that is a hugely historical event. I would suggest start anywhere. Start any year, any day. Start writing about anything. And if you're thinking about a story that you want to tell, I would even encourage you to start writing in the middle of that story. The reason why is because it's easier. If you start writing at the beginning of a story, it can be sort of intimidating to look at a blank page because you know the beginning has to do certain things for you. It has to give a general idea of where you are and what it's about. It has to be kind of engaging, right? It's a little bit intimidating and maybe you don't know what you're going to say yet. So start in the middle, go to the end, then to the front. I would also encourage you that if you're writing a story, such as Michael has an index of all the many dozens of stories that he's written about his life, I would encourage you to make that list first so that, well, two things. One is that you know all the things that you're going to be writing about. Keep adding to that list. It might just be 5 things. But if you have more than one story on your list, when you get stuck on one of them and you can't tell that story anymore and you don't know what you're going to say, go do another one. That's my suggestion. All right. So when you're writing, I say write clearly, and you're going to say, of course, that's obvious. But a lot of times when we're writing, we get stuck writing the way we were trained to write in 8th grade expository writing. We may think that it has to be written quite formally. I would encourage you not to write formally. I would encourage you to write simple, clear sentences. Grandpa bought a farm in 1948. You can write like that. Once you have a sentence like that, you have the basic information. You can add flowery language if you would like to, if that's the way you speak. But I would encourage you to write the way you speak. And the reason why is 2 reasons. One is that it's easier to understand than very formal academic language. And the second is because you're the one talking. It's your story. Your family, your future family wants to hear from you. They don't want to, they want to hear your voice. They will want to hear your voice. So that's my stand on writing. Write clearly, write plainly, write simply. So as you're writing, I would encourage you to keep a few things in mind. I say include your emotions. Now, what I mean by that is, for example, I was remembering a family trip that we made to California when I was in 5th grade. And I was remembering that, that our visit was rather uncomfortable and sort of tense. And I didn't know why. And so I asked my father about it. This was a few years ago. And I said, it seems like that trip was kind of tense. And he says, oh, hell yeah. It turned out that there was a big thing going on during that visit. There was a lot of conflict going on during that visit. And so if I were to write about that, and I was writing about that trip, and I wrote it that it was tense, it's okay. It's good to write that down. Do your research. You'll find out why you had that emotion. So don't be shy to include your emotions because there's going to be something to it. Speech to text is on my slide because another way to keep going is if you get tired of typing, you get tired of handwriting, Microsoft Word makes it really easy to speak into your computer microphone, and it transcribes what you're saying as if you have a secretary, okay? So even if you have trouble typing, that's just a little aid that you can use when you get tired of typing. I suggest that you have a filing system for the things that you're writing. Have folders that are called like 1972 or Our Trip to Norway or something. And then in that folder, you keep the things that you wrote about it, but also the images that you might want to use, or maybe the research links that are associated with what you're working on, so that you keep things together. So then you don't have to keep it in your head where things are. And then back up your files. Everyone knows this. Many of us have had to learn it the hard way, right? But back up your files, because if you've done all that work and something's gone, it can just feel terrible, and you might give up on the project. We don't want you to do that. We want you to keep going. Right.
Oh, pardon me, real
So
quick.
the
Sorry,
next
Anne.
Yes.
The audio was cutting out there a little bit. It's been going out a little bit. And so just the audio. So I'm not sure if you're covering your mic when you're kind of sitting back and putting your hands down, but I just wanted to chime in real quick to let you know. But it was going fine.
My mic is in my camera. Sorry about that.
Okay.
So
No,
I'm
it's
not
okay.
sure. That must be a bandwidth problem. Sorry about that.
Yeah. It hasn't been that bad, so don't worry about it. So I just wanted to.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is context. When you're writing your memoirs, of course, it is your own impression of what happened. But I want you to give a complete picture. So I'm saying please write plainly, but I want you to also say why you did the things you did, how it affected other people, and the sort of historical context of what was going on at that time, because it will make your story more interesting. So here's a slide from the autobiography. It's not an autobiography, it's a memoir of Walter Mondale's political career called The Good Fight. So this is an excerpt that explains why he ran for president. Question that came up repeatedly was, if Reagan is so popular, why run? I would say, I want to take this guy on. I tried to set aside my feelings from the previous year's campaign, that is when he ran with Jimmy Carter, but I was immediately offended by the way Reagan governed. Now that's a very powerful explanation of why he decided to run for president. So when you're writing your memoir, say why you did the things that you did, because it's very illuminating to know. I'm going to give you another example from Katharine Graham, who was the publisher of the Washington Post for a couple of decades. She's talking about when her husband died. He was the publisher, and she became publisher after he died. And she says, so my going to work, that is after her husband died, made it easier for me to resume life after Phil's death. It certainly made it harder for my two younger sons. She's admitting that her decision had a negative impact on other people. In effect, they both lost both parents at once. Up to that time, I had been a fairly present mother. In different ways, they were both having a hard time. So my advice is, it's not always rosy. Not every story you write is going to have a happy ending, and that's okay, because that's the way life is. Another example of context is historical context. So in a memoir called Remembering Shanghai by Isabel Sunchow, she left China during the Cultural Revolution, 1950. She went to Hong Kong. She escaped to Hong Kong. And she said, many were like me, starting from scratch. At the time I arrived in Hong Kong in spring 1950, until the British finally began to enforce border controls in 1951, an estimated 100,000 Chinese were streaming in every month. So she was one of 100,000 people coming into Hong Kong every month. So in this case, she was one of many. And so that's interesting historical context. But in other cases, maybe you were the first person who did what you did. Maybe you were the first person to become president of an organization. Maybe you're the first woman to be president of an organization or something. And these are pieces of context that are sometimes easy to find, sometimes not so easy to find, but can be found and can give context to the story that you're telling. I'm just going to name a few research resources here that you can use when you're doing your memoirs. Your memoirs are, of course, personal memories, but sometimes you want to do a little research about the period. So ask a librarian. They are detectives. They love to help you find things out. You can look at books about the period, novels or history books. The Wayback Machine is a really cool thing that archives. It takes a picture of a website, and it's been doing so for 20 years. So you can search websites that no longer exist. So that goes back 20 years. It doesn't go back past that, but could be helpful if you're looking for things that used to be online. Newspapers have archives, both online and paper ones. Your local historical society, Minnesota Historical Society, has documents. I used this when I was writing up something recently about my mother. I was trying to figure out about a big event that I knew she was a part of, and it was there in the Historical Society. It was Scandinavia Today, 1982. They had information about that. And of course, ask other people who were there. That's another great source, and that's exactly what Michael did with his mother-in-law. Yep. He was writing up about her. Okay, so when you write your memoirs, you may want to illustrate them. I would encourage you to use family photos, art, as in the Norway House current gallery show that's on right now, the Red River Girl. That is all about the artifacts, the art that she and her family did of their family farm. And I would encourage you to visit the Norway House gallery show right now. There are public records for who lived in houses who owned houses at certain times. So you can find out what years exactly you lived in a certain house if your family owned it. You can look at maps and blueprints. Okay, so that's about the writing and research part. I want to talk a little bit how you organize your stories. Now, one way to organize your stories is to put them into chronological order. It might seem like the only way, but it's not the only way to organize your stories. In fact, chronological might not be the most interesting way to put your stories together. You might decide that you're going to have all the things that happened at the cabin, for example. Or you might have stories of all the strong women in my family. Or you might have all about all of the dogs that we have owned, or a particular dog that you owned. The point is that anything that goes on in your family, you can group your stories by theme. So don't be shy to think about doing it that way. And if you get a number of stories and a number of groups of stories together, you can put them in chronological order, or you don't have to. I would encourage you, however, to start your memoir, if you've got a collection of stories together, with the most interesting one, or the one that sort of defines your story. For example, with Walter Mondale, when he wrote his memoirs about his political career, he did do it in chronological order, but he started in, I think, 1962. So it was at the beginning of his political career, but it was not at the beginning of his life or his first interest in politics. Okay, once you have done some writing, you are going to want to show it to people. Especially if you're going to spend money on having it printed. Is everything okay, Max?
The audio went out a little bit there. I think when the computer shifted, it adjusted the audio. So.
Okay. Sorry about that.
There we go.
Okay. Once you've written a bunch of stories and you feel like you have a collection, or even at any point when you're writing, it's a good idea to have someone else read your article. The reason why is because I'm a writer and editor. I've been so for 30 years, and I've been an editor, but I need an editor if I write something, because when you get too close to something, you can't always see the problems. You can't see that, oh, there's a fact missing. It doesn't make sense why that happened. right? So show it to someone. Show it to someone who was there and remembers what happened. Show it to someone who is a good writer, and then ask for specific feedback. And when I say ask for specific feedback, ask them things like, what did this story make you feel? Did this story make sense? And what did this story make you wonder? Now, the reason I advise people to use those kinds of questions is because if you show your story to someone and you say, what do you think? You're going to get one of two answers in my experience. One answer is, I don't think that word should be capitalized. You might get a real specific answer. And usually that's not helpful to know if the story is interesting, if it flows. The other thing that they might say is, really good. Which it might be, but that is not very helpful feedback. It doesn't help you improve your story. So I would suggest that you ask specific questions like, did it make sense? And what do you think is missing? And if that person was actually there when that happened, then they might be able to provide a lot more information to you about what happened. I also would suggest that you show your stories to the people who are mentioned in them. And the reason why is because they might know something more about what happened, and also because it's just polite to do so, so they don't get surprised, especially if you get something wrong, or maybe it was something that they would rather you didn't bring up. Okay, now, as Michael said, everything's on computers these days, and so you can publish. I am not going to give advice on how to get an agent and how to find a big-time publisher, because this is aimed at first-time writers, and I know many of you are beginner memoir writers from our poll. But self-publishing is accessible to anyone in the world, and it's free. So you can write an ebook. I have MN Writes, MN Reads is a website. It's a service by the Minnesota Libraries Association. So anyone in Minnesota, I believe you have to have a library card, so you have to be able to log in, but it's free. And it produces an ebook, and you can put pictures in it, and it's broadly distributed, and you can show it to your relatives, and you can change it anytime you want because it's online. If you're associated with the University of Minnesota, there's a, like if you work there, I believe alumni and retirees, as I am, have the same service at the University of Minnesota, similar to the MN Writes, MN Reads service through the Libraries Association. You might consider just writing a blog. Blogs are traditionally used for current information, but there isn't any reason why you couldn't use Blogger or another simple blogging platform, because it's just easy. You just do a little bit and you share it with your friends, and it's online. And then of course there's the printing option. And Michael was going to show a couple of the books that his father, it's a collection of his father's writings that they had printed. And you can just go to FedEx Kinko's. Sure. They will ask you what kind of paper you want to use, how many copies you want to print, how do you want it bound, and you can do stapled.
This is what my dad wrote. This was just a bunch of typewritten pages across the years. A lot of pictures are in there from past pictures, present pictures, and it's basically they just take it right off the type pages. You don't have to reprint anything, and they don't set type. You just type it up, and they do it. And then my dad kept a whole lot of stuff. He just kept making notes and writing stories and whatnot, and with pictures. And so we put up this whole thing together. What is it now? Many pages, 475 pages, and we just took the typewritten pages down to the print shop. I think that in this case, I think it was Kinko's right out here in Roseville, and they help you set it up, and we get it printed off. The one mistake that we made was we didn't print enough of them, because of course once you start distributing them, then people want some more. So so this is becoming a limited edition, and if you have one, you got to hang on to it. And then Oh, we found some stuff that my dad had written. My dad would sit in his lake cabin and the little boathouse overlooking the lake. And he would, with his little old beat up LC Smith typewriter, smoking his pipe, smoking the boathouse, so nobody could hardly sit there anymore. And he would type out stuff that he thought, just thoughts, reflections on his own families, ideas that he had, experiences he had. We put all this together and we just called it the Book of Observations. And then for the back, we just put in a whole bunch of family pictures in there. And again, the problem is you don't know how many to print because you don't know who's going to read them, and you will end up by not printing enough. Trust me. Oh yeah, here. This is another one. Where's my? When my grandmother died. When my grandmother died, we discovered that she wrote a whole lot of letters to her mother. And, this was before handy long distance telephoning. So she wrote letters and letters from her mother. When her mother died, that is my great grandmother, they gave them all back. So we found this whole pile in the box, many, many boxes, and they had been long forgotten. Nobody had ever seen them besides my great grandmother who had read them. But an aunt of mine printed them all up or typed it all out. So now we have a record, and it's really a letter. It's a record of her whole life. So it's her autobiography in letters. And this thing, you can tell how big this is. Same thing, we just self-publish it. This is not published commercially. We just take it, I forget who published it, but as Ann said, there's a lot of places. So you can do this kind of thing, and it's very nice, and it's really doing a favor for your family when they have this. Otherwise, nobody would ever see this.
And I just want to suggest too that I know that Michael, you don't have to go that far, right? You have computer files that you've shared with your family so that they can read the things that you've written, and they know the password, or maybe it's saved somewhere that where you can all access it, and so you don't have to even go as far as publishing, as printing.
Right, they can copy it off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's our presentation. I anticipate that many people will be asking about the self-publishing links that I mentioned, and so I do have a handout that I'm going to send out to you later because I know that some people might want the links. But we'll open it up for Q&A, and Max was going to post it, right?
Yeah. So, well, thank you, Ann and Michael, first of all, for that wonderful presentation. I know we have a few questions here. And again, for everyone, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to type them into the Q&A button at the bottom here. You could also raise your hand. And by doing so, I mean the feature at the bottom of your screen. So again, if you hover to the bottom of your screen, there's kind of a little hand icon. You can click on that. It says raise hand. Tap your screen if you're on a mobile device. And if you do that, I will kind of prompt you to ask a question over voice. So that way you don't have to type it, but we can hear you. So as you think about some of those questions there, and then we kind of had some prompts. So kind of thinking about how, what roadblocks are you facing when you think about writing your own memoirs, or how can they help you even get started? And like Ann said, we'll share that document that she shared with you later and that Michael shared with you later. We are recording this presentation tonight, so we will send this out to you in the next couple of days. But yeah, let's get started with some questions. So first here, we have, what's your feeling on keeping the same names or changing names on stories that might be difficult?
Michael, you had a thought about that?
I think I do change a lot of names because number one, if people don't know that I'm writing about them, they might not know that. And I don't want to write anything about anybody, a story from somebody in the family or friend or whatnot that would embarrass them or that they wouldn't want known. So in many cases, I simply don't write those. Otherwise, there's a lot of stories that I just change the names. And usually, I mean, if I write something about somebody, I do let them know. But most people, it's just everyday, interesting stuff that happens. So, but yeah, I'd change if they don't want you to use their name, then just change the name.
Great. And actually kind of a question here. Oh, now questions starting to pour in. I love it. So kind of piggyback, I suppose, off that last question there. So if people are still alive, do you have them read your whole story first before you include them? Or if they've passed on, do you have their children read it first? So how much, I suppose, do you have other family members edit your stories?
I mean, your memoir is your memoir, so it's your story to tell. And if you're telling stories about people who are alive, then you have to respect their wishes if they don't want to be included, I think. I'm a former journalist, so as a journalist, you would consider that differently if you need someone to be on the record. But if you're writing a memoir, as Michael said, change their name. It's also possible to consolidate people. Like if they're not important people, if it's just that you have to say that a certain person in a certain town was unkind to your mother, right? Maybe you want to tell a story like that somebody was discriminated against or something like that. Then the fact that it happened is more important than the name of the person, I would say. But do you show it to those people? I mean, if they're not people that you really know or that you're going to name, I don't know if you need to.
No, I don't think so. I think back on some of the funny stuff that has happened. I don't think in many cases, I might not use the right name. If I do use their name, then I think I would let them know that. But if it's just a funny episode, I mean, in Duluth, for instance, every year our church would have a lutefisk supper. It was the only congregation left having a lutefisk supper. Well, there's some very funny stories once you have lutefisk suppers, and and I've written down some of them. I don't know if I even had names in there, but I would not write a story about any kind of episode like that and use a name if it would get back to them and they would be embarrassed about it or wish I hadn't told it. You have to be, you have to respect people's wishes about confidentiality, and you just have to be a little wise about that. I've never run into any trouble with that. I've never had anybody storm into my house and say, you never should have written. Of course, hardly anybody's ever read anything I've written anyway of my stories. So
oh, go on. They have to.
Issue hasn't come up much.
Oh, great. Well, say kind of about, more questions are popping in and I love it. So we'll try to get through what we can here, but if there's more questions, I'll send these to Anne and Michael afterwards. But yeah, I think we have a few more minutes for some more. So one person says, my parents will often start telling stories without prompting, and I don't think to write it down in the moment or record it in the moment. So do you have any advice for getting those interviews or stories from those people documented? And kind of on top of that as well, if you're not ready to write a full memoir in that moment, or do you have any kind of advice for note taking, how you're taking notes to kind of keep these for later? I know, Michael, you mentioned kind of jotting them down on pieces of paper and saving them till later, but are there any other tips and tricks for prompting, I suppose? And then
I don't take notes. I don't take notes of family conversations, but nowadays I've often wished I had a tape recorder. It'd be very simple just to push record. Like that evening at the lake when I listened to my uncles tell all these wonderful family stories. I wish I would have had a tape recording. Yep. But what I did do was after I wrote some of my notes down, I would ask my uncle if I got it right. So you try and put it together. But boy, I wish I had a tape recorder back then.
Me too.
Well,
and
nowadays
the wording that people use is important to the story, and it's part of the flavor of the story. It's really good to have good notes. So I guess write things down as soon as you can. I'm encouraging, since I've been thinking about this memoir writing class, I've been encouraging my children who are in their early 20s to write down their early memories, because the younger you are, the more you remember your early life.
That's true. Well, and I was going to say, it's disappearing as I'm holding it up, but this is my phone that I'm shaking in my hand. But the voice memo feature on smartphones now, if you have a smartphone, you've got it. I could see myself I have a family reunion later this summer. Just kind of popping that on in the background, and of course, we'll ask, it's recorded. So, well, good. Well, here, actually, and since you just mentioned childhood and kind of writing stories as you're younger so you remember them, if you're writing about childhood, is it okay not to get facts right? So in other words, is it okay just to get impressions of one's childhood down, even if the facts are wrong?
A memoir is how you remember it.
Yeah.
So I encourage people to do some research to make sure that it's not total fiction, right? But it's your memory. So recently I was writing about things that happened to me as a child, and I don't know if the person who asked this question has started doing this already, has started writing already, but I found that when I started thinking about those early memories, childhood memories, when I was about 10 years old, it was in there. Like there was a lot of information inside my head. And once I started writing it, there was a lot there. So I think feel confident that what you remember is what happened. And I mean, check things as much as you can, but for the people in your family, your future family who are going to be reading that, they could check it if they wanted to and find out if it historically didn't happen. But more likely, they just want to hear your impressions.
Yeah, and you can be very candid and say, well, this is how I remember it. Or I'm not quite sure where this happened or what, but I mean, you could just be very candid in what you remember and things that you might not remember.
Great. Well, good. Yeah, because I'm trying to think of myself and remembering childhood. I'm sure there's differences in how I remember my own childhood, but like you said, it's all about the impressions and how those, transform you, affect you. Let's see here. I have actually a couple on writing about dialogues or conversations within memoirs. Thoughts on including other languages in memoirs, as well as advice on writing conversation or dialogue to keep people's expressions and or accents intact within your memoir.
Yeah, I think it's good to get as much flavor as possible. And my father was an immigrant and his English wasn't perfect. In fact, his Norwegian wasn't perfect either. And I wish that I had recordings of the way he spoke so that I could quote him accurately. But having to rely on my memory, yeah, I would write in the way that I remember that he spoke when quoting him. Yeah.
We have a lot of friends in Germany and we write back and forth or telephone back and forth. So whenever I write down anything that they might have said, I always have to make sure I get the umlauts right. I mean, writing in English is one thing, but for me, writing in German is a little kind of a chore, but I do try and get it accurate.
Yeah. And writing in other languages, I suppose the main consideration if you're writing for other people, think about your audience. Will they be able to understand it? Maybe you'll want to include in translation, but if you're writing online, I mean, the way things are now, it's so easy to translate things. So it's not really going to be a big issue you'll just click on it and say, Google, what does this say in English? And it'll tell you if it's online.
Great. A couple questions here actually about printing and distribution of the books. So how do you handle the cost of printing as you distribute these books to family? I've heard of publishing places where you can put up the book and individuals can then order and pay their own copies. Do you know what services those may be? And to kind of tack on another question onto this one, because it's involving distribution and printing, how do you deal with low quality images when trying to incorporate pictures into your book?
What did you do with images? Did you have someone enhance them for you or design those pages for you with the images?
Yeah, I think we selected pictures that would work, and then we would include them and then make sure they got printed okay. So we had a lot of old pictures there, from old family pictures. They aren't the best in the world.
Yeah.
But yeah, we use a lot of pictures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that can be done with simple, Photoshop Elements is the cheapest. Actually, the cheapest one is Microsoft. I think it's called Picture. It comes with the Office suite. It's pretty easy to touch up pictures that you scan. And of course, you have to use pictures that are that can be seen. Like if it's just so faint that you can't make it out of, you can't, I mean, if it looks like an ultrasound, you can't figure out where the baby is, then you probably can't use it. But yeah, I mean, just do your best and touch it up. And probably there's somebody in your family who knows a little bit about photo editing, I would guess, if it's a family
Those younger
project.
generations with, you know, us with our filters
Yep.
and whatnot. So.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. And as far as paying for printing, I was wondering about that too, Michael, when you have these many books published, it does cost money. Do you share the cost with your family members, or do you just give it as a gift?
We have done that. We all pitched in, basically. And but of course, you always want to print more than are going to be distributed right then and there. So I just think we just all pitched in about the same.
And as far as an online print on demand kind of thing, I'm afraid I'm not a very good resource for that. I don't have a good link, but I could look it up and put it in the handout if I can find one.
Gotcha. Okay. And I think we'll just take one more question here as we're just about to the bottom of the hour. And this one kind of relates to, I'm going to try to tack two together here again. Just talking about difficult situations or uncomfortable situations. So things like alcoholism or abuse, especially if like the rest of the family is uncomfortable talking about these things or they don't want to talk about these things. Is it best to avoid it altogether, or how do you bring that up in your writing? And then kind of, again, piggybacking off of that, we're in COVID-19 times now, as we know, that can be pretty divisive as far as left and right mentalities and attitudes. Is that something you suggest also writing about from one perspective or both sides of the perspective to kind of get a better idea within your memoir, or how would you approach those situations?
Memoirs are personal. It's your own point of view. So you're writing about your experience. You know, and back in newspaper photojournalism time, what we always said was get the photo, decide later if you're going to use it, right? So if you have a judgment call to make, whether or not you're going to publish something, maybe you won't publish it, maybe you won't use it, but I would suggest you write it down. Maybe you won't share it with anyone, maybe you'll take it out, maybe you'll delete it, maybe you'll have your personal copy, but it gets back to, why am I doing this? Am I doing this because I need to get it off my chest? Am I doing it because I want my future generations to know what I went through? Things like alcoholism are tough things. They can be treated with humor. They can be treated factually. They don't have to be emotionally laden. It can be just stated as a fact. I know that that's complicated because there are a lot of, you know, there can be shame associated with alcoholism or things like that. But it gets back to why you're doing it and who you're writing for, I think, when it comes to sharing that information. Did you want to say something about that too?
I mean, my general guideline, if I have a guideline, a lot of times I write down stories because they're interesting. I don't have any. I hope I want to remember them. They were a really interesting part of my life. But I think you aren't going to write down something that is, first of all, you don't divulge confidences. And of course, I was a pastor, so a lot of people would confide in me things and tell me about things that, and you just don't write stuff like that. You don't write something that a person might feel bad that you wrote it. But there's all kinds of interesting stuff in a person's life. You got plenty of stuff. You got plenty of stuff to work with.
Well, good.
I think generally, I was the oldest person. Well, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you go ahead, because I was going to wrap it up. So please.
I'm the oldest in our family. And I think one of the guidelines that I write, I think of things that I experienced in my life. I worked on a farm, for instance. My children haven't any idea of that whole life. But things about my life that I think are not only interesting to me, I like to write them down just to remember them, but I also keep in mind that I'd like my children to know something about the world that I grew up in, and grandchildren. So it may never get published. It may not ever go any further than that, but that's enough.
Yep, just write it down. Go ahead.
Still
You
important.
can do it.
Yeah. Still important though. I mean, I think to my, I was fortunate enough to know my great grandfather, actually two of my great grandparents before they passed away. And just to know that my great grandfather essentially saw electricity in homes, you know, and how far we've come in his lifetime. He saw electricity in homes to the internet and virtual reality before he passed away. I mean, I can only imagine what I'm going to see in my lifetime at that rate, you know, and how much fun to.
My grandparents had crank telephones. You sat there and cranked out your number.
Yeah.
I guess I've never seen one of those.
Yep. Human ingenuity is just getting, you know, faster and faster. So, but well, thank you both, Anne and Michael, for that wonderful presentation, answering these questions for us here. Again, everybody, we will make this available to you. We'll send out a link so you can watch this video via YouTube in the next couple of days here after I download it and edit it up and get it online. And you know, if you have any other questions, please feel free to email me at mstevenson@norwayhouse.org. I will put that here in the chat, and we will share these. And actually, Anne, you had your email up too, so you can email Anne.
Yeah,
actually,
Michael and I will. I'll share in my handout. Michael and I will share our email addresses because.
Oh, perfect. Great.
To answer questions, and so am I.
Yeah. Well, is there anything you, Anne or Michael, you wanted to kind of part with before we close here?
Enjoy doing it.
Enjoy it. You can do it.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, I think you gave a lot of great tips and encouragement, and it was really nice to hear some of your own stories, Michael. So we'll look forward to seeing, you know, if we get any people writing stories and letting us know how they turned out. So thank you again so much, everybody, for joining us for writing your own memoirs this evening. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Tusen tack.